Congress discovered William. Now, in the intervening 10 years, he has gone on to write 12 books. 12 books. His newest project is this new DVD production, Stargate 2012. He has become a favorite on the Coast to Coast radio program, and he now co-hosts Dreamland with Whitley Strieber. Ladies and gentlemen, a big Congress welcome, William Henry.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, scholars. How are y'all doing? I want to certainly thank Bob and Terry for inviting me. This is a spectacular event. I've made a lot of friends as a result of coming out here, and it's just certainly my pleasure to make a return visit and spend this morning with you. And I appreciate y'all getting up early this morning. As they say, the early bird gets the worm whole, and we will be talking about stargates and wormholes this morning. Let's now talk about our real mission here for today, which is to illuminate the deeper codes underlying ancient art portraying the gods in their craft. And remember, the word craft stands for can't remember a friggin' thing. And so we're all trying to remember what this business is about with these gods and their craft. Our second mission is to connect the old religion and the new science, which ultimately will help us to enrich humanity for all. So I want to begin this morning with this rather interesting depiction from the ancient world. It's a kind of an Eric von Daniken moment, if you will, because as we look at this here, what do we see? We see some fish-garbed gods standing before a radiant pillar with gods hovering above in some form of a craft. Now, with all due respect, I call this a von Daniken moment because Mr. von Daniken would say that's a UFO. And he might well be correct. I mean, that could be a UFO. We notice in the left-hand corner down here at the side that we see a pillar attached to a dragon. What's that? And what is its relationship to the craft that the gods are hovering above within? This looks like a party scene to me, and it's certainly one that I think we might like to join. Now we go to see Istara or Mari, the goddess Istara or Mari, who stands before her pillar. She's pointing to this pine cone-shaped object, and we see a serpent that is entering into or exiting from that pillar. And of course, she has her satellite dish up above. Is it a satellite dish, or what is it? It's some form of a craft. It's apparent that the pillar that Istara or Mari, later called Mary, is pointing to is the same pillar that we saw in the previous diagram, the previous illustration. What is that pillar, and what is its relationship to the craft? Well, we see all kinds of pillars. Here's an example of one. We see two gods standing before a ringed pillar. And as we count the rings, we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All good children go to heaven. And of course, we see the winged disc, the symbol for heaven above this ringed pillar. We see a similar pillar in this portrayal with the gods pointing to a flying disc, a winged disc with a god being hovering above. What is that craft? What is this pillar? Who are these eagle-headed beings that are supervising this? They're called Anunnaki, a very general term for beings who came to earth from the heavens, according to Zecharia Sitchin. We see another phenomenal example of the exact same scene portrayed here in this cylinder seal from J.P. Morgan's personal collection. We see fish-garbed gods standing before a radiant pillar that is emanating a mesh-like range of frequency, if you will, and we notice that they're garbed in exactly the same mesh-like web of frequency, if you will. They point to the god hovering above in the craft who is identified as Ea or Enki, the bioengineer, according to Zecharia Sitchin, who had a hand in generating or recreating the human body into its present form. Jules Morgenstern tells us that the officiating priest in this scene is called the Masmasu, which means the purifier. Ea, or Enki, and Marduk are both repeatedly called Masmas Ilani. Now, this Masmas term, meaning purifier, is very important because it later shows up in the name Moses and also Messiah. And there are deep connections between Moses and Jesus the Messiah, or Christ, as we call him in Tennessee, where I live, and this scene right here. And I'm going to demonstrate that connection as we continue. Morgenstern also gives us a very key piece of information telling us that the name of this radiant pillar is called the Mul Ilu. That is the name of this utensil. Mul, interestingly enough, is the Sumerian word for star. Ilu can mean light, making the star of light one possible interpretation of the word Mul Ilu. Now, this can be stretched to stare of light, the ladder to the heavens, because that is exactly what is portrayed in this purification ceremony, is the means by which we can purify ourselves preparatory to walking the stairway to the stars, the Stargate of the gods. And this is why I call my mystery school Enki's School for the Blind. Because once we fully understand the meaning of these symbols, the craft, the radiant pillar, the fish-clad gods, we see clearly. Our thoughts are cleansed and purified. We become, in a sense, a godlike being. Now, it's also a fact in cylinder seals that the gods weren't always portrayed flying around in craft. They also came through gateways. This is the sun god Shamash, who is entering Earth through the twin peaks, through the double mountain that looks sort of like the English letter M. Here he is again, with Enki beside him, with the fish in the stream here. Enki supervising, once again, the arrival of the sun god through the twin peaks. I found an Aztec depiction of a serpent, which is what you see here on the bottom, that looks strikingly similar in shape to the twin peaks through which the sun god enters the earth plane. And I wondered for a long time, what is the connection between the serpent-shaped twin peaks and the twin peaks themselves? And it was actually the great Egyptologist John Anthony West that explained this to me. He says that at the entranceway, the gateway to all Egyptian temples, you have the twin peaks, and the sun rises in between the twin peaks. And what he did for me was something very magical. He said, this is the twin peaks right here. And that, he said, is also a waveform. That is a sine wave. It is a vibration. When the serpent vibrates, it gives off a frequency or vibration, just like a guitar string or another stringed instrument. So what we're asked to, or encouraged to contemplate here, is that this God is entering the earth through a gateway that is composed of a tone or a vibration. Now go back to Istara or Mari, and what do we see? That serpent entering into or exiting from the radiant pillar is in fact a sine wave. It is a vibration, and the God rides in that vibration. It's also a matter of fact that the object that Mari points to is shaped strikingly similar to a human pineal gland. And in my work, I have looked at the connection between the pineal gland as a wireless transmitter capable of receiving resonance from the heavens. Hence the winged craft that looks like a satellite dish. And there is a deep connection between the pineal gland and these craft. Were we to take this vibrating serpent and turn it into a circle, the symbol of completion, we would have the alchemical symbol of the Ouroboros. And of course, the alchemists practice the craft. And that is exactly what we're talking about here, is the process of purifying a human preparatory to partaking in the gateway experience of the gods. And here we see in this Assyrian depiction two god beings in the heavenly pose symbol, lifting the energy of the heavens, symbolized by the winged disc. We see a third god riding in the ring, riding in the ring. riding in the vibration of life. He is fully cleansed and purified. He is a God. He is a master of the craft, a craftsman. Which is why it makes this medieval depiction of Jesus particularly interesting. We see Jesus within the radiant blue orb. I call a blue apple. Around the perimeter of the orb, we see the Ouroboros serpents, the golden circle. This portrayal of Jesus is a perfect match for the way the ancient gods were portrayed, riding in their craft, their winged discs, their rings of life, Yahweh riding upon the ring. Zoroaster riding upon the ring, but now he also has the ring firmly in his hand. He is the ring lord, the lord of the ring, because he has the vibe of power. Very much like Vishnu, who rides upon his bird and holds in his hand his chakra, or ring of power, that he uses to protect himself from evil spirits. The rings reappeared today, my friends. We call it a Stargate. A Stargate. A technology that enables us to travel from point A on Earth to point B throughout anywhere in the known universe as if there's nothing in between. It is the stairway to heaven. When Jacob arose from his experience of seeing the ladder that rose into the heavens, with angels ascending and descending on either side, he awakened from his experience and said, "This is none other than the gate to God, and this is the gate to heaven." And the name of that place in the book of Genesis is called Luz, which means light. So today we are being reintroduced into the mysteries of light itself through movies. When Kurt Russell and his characters enter the Stargate in the movie, they enter a gate composed of water. Well, isn't that interesting? Because when we turn back to the ancient Sumerian myth of Gilgamesh, we find a hero who found that he was 2/3 human, 1/3 divine. And he sought to cleanse and purify himself in order to become a whole God being. He sought the mountain of the gods, the waveform, and he sought the plants of the gods as well as the gate of the gods. And as evidenced by this cylinder seal, he appears to have found it. For Gilgamesh stands in the gateway. He has climbed the stairway, and we see the gods on either side with their ringing pillars or posts. These are the two cherubim at the gate of Eden that Yahweh placed there when he evicted us from that Garden of Eden. As we look at this detail, we see that Gilgamesh stands in the gate, and he is surrounded by wiggly lines that look like serpents. These are actually representative of water, frequency, vibration. So Gilgamesh stands in the water gate. He is in the vibrational gate of the gods. And here from dating to 2334 BC, we see another detail of the gods with their ringed posts. Coming in a little bit more closely, we can clearly see that the post has a ring attached to it, but up on top it has a curious hourglass shape. That hourglass shape is exactly the way modern science portrays a stargate or a wormhole today. Is this correspondence between modern science and ancient myth purely coincidence? Or were the Sumerians presenting to us evidence of their knowledge of the primordial sacred science of the gods, how to travel the universe through stargates and wormholes? This, I suggest, scholars, is the shape of our future, right here, the hourglass shape of the stargate or the wormhole. This is where we want to focus our attention. And as we come back to the Temple of Edfu in Egypt, what do we find? We find a pharaoh prepared to walk the stairway to the heavens, the stair of the gods. And as we note in this detail, there is a utensil that appears to have opened the stairway to the heavens. And it appears, in a sense, if you use your imagination, as if this utensil is emitting a frequency or a vibration, and that this pharaoh is prepared to walk this invisible vibration into the heavens. So here we have an interesting comparison now between the star utensil of the Sumerians, the Mul Ilu, the star of light, with the Egyptian stair, the stairway into the heavens. Both cultures appeared to focus on a utensil as a device for opening these gateways into the other realms. But as we look more closely, we notice that the Pharaoh climbs the stairway to heaven, and he boards the Ark of the Millions of Years, the ship of the gods. And we see the very distinctive shape of that ship, and we compare it with the way modern science portrays a wormhole, and we have a virtual match between the Egyptian depiction of the ship of the gods and a wormhole that will enable travel, instantaneous travel from Earth to other places within the cosmos. Now, here's a caveat. Egyptologists say it's absolutely ridiculous to claim that the Egyptian gods or the Sumerian gods traveled in stargates and wormholes. Point is taken. However, my rebuttal would be that maybe that is so. However, modern stargate designers, and I include myself in that category, stargate pioneers, can use the ancient Egyptian myths, metaphors, and metaphysics in the design of the wormholes in the futures. In fact, we absolutely must if we're going to get that correct. So here's another beautiful painting from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The inscription reads, "The God who is in Osiris," and it also reads, "The Holy Shore," because what we are presented with is the dual-headed serpent ship of the gods with the stairway to heaven mounted atop it. It's a wormhole. It is a wormhole. Now we go back to Mari once again, and we note that the dual-headed serpent that is entering into or exiting from the utensil is a waveform, but it perfectly matches the way the Egyptians portrayed the Stargate of the gods. Now, this is not just pure speculation. It's actually vital knowledge if we are to interpret correctly some of the Mayan prophecies surrounding the 2012 event. Maya scholar John Major Jenkins tells us that what the Mayas prophesied was that in December 2012, from the center of our galaxy was going to come a serpent rope, the Mayan term, serpent rope. And riding or surfing upon that serpent rope would be a god of enlightenment. Now, what John Major Jenkins speculated, and I certainly agree in attempting to support his thesis, is that we can take out the archaic Mayan term serpent rope and insert the modern word wormhole, and we have exactly what the Mayans said is going to go down in 2012. A wormhole from the center of our Milky Way galaxy is going to open, and from out of it is going to come some miraculous and wondrous things. A wormhole. Just imagine if we were suddenly to become a Stargate or wormhole traveling civilization. Well, we can once again go back to some of the most ancient art and some of the most beautiful religious art to find this symbolism. On the left is the Maya 2012 drawing portraying the serpent rope or wormhole. On the right is a 19th century Buddhist painting of the goddess Kuan Yin or Istara, who's also called the goddess of compassion, Canaan. And what we note is that Canaan has a rod in her hand, some form of a utensil. And attached to that rod is a glowing golden orb with a baby soul in that golden glowing orb. And that baby soul is looking back at the great mother goddess Mary, Istara, Isis, and saying, "But I want to stay with you in the pure place." But the goddess says, "No, my child, you are my divine emissary of peace. You have to incarnate in the earth plane in order to bring my messages of peace to the world." We note that the baby soul has wrapped around it an umbilical cord. And as we follow the path of that umbilical cord, we notice that it goes down into a craggy, rocky area. The Japanese painter who painted this says that is Earth. That's Earth. And the message here is that there is this umbilical cord or serpent rope or wormhole that connects us with the primordial mother, and it brings blessings to our planet once we bring this technology into our world. This is perhaps why the Egyptian hieroglyph for abundance shows what? A stargate or a wormhole with the stairway to heaven mounted to it. Well, yeah, because once we harness this technology, we're no longer dependent on the fossil fuels of our planet. We have harnessed instead the power of the black hole or white hole at the center of our galaxy, and we have become a Stargate traveling civilization. We're out of kindergarten and are now in first grade, cosmically speaking. Intergalactic wormhole traveling humans. This painting, once again from the Book of the Dead, pretty much spells it out for me. The god rides upon his wormhole into a gate of stars, rides the wormhole through the Stargate. To be allowed onto the ship or Stargate of the gods is to traverse eternity with the gods. This is one of the ultimate goals of the Egyptians. And I sense that perhaps everyone in this room right now is an Egyptian. So let's look at this Egyptian god. He's on his ark or bark of the millions of years, which has the familiar wormhole shape. He's also enfolded within the umbilical cord. He's exactly like the baby in the painting of Kuan Yin. But what I wanted to call your attention to was the helmsman of this ship. You notice that he is surrounded by a particular hieroglyph, which I have highlighted in green. There's that glyph. Now, take a look at the way modern science also portrays the folding of space, something that occurs when a wormhole is opened. Now go back and compare the Egyptian hieroglyph with the modern depiction of a Stargate or a wormhole. It's the same thing. It's the exact same symbol. In fact, what we're looking at on the bottom is the Egyptian hieroglyph for the letters TH, which is kind of humorous, because if we take the Egyptian hieroglyph th and add it with the glyph ru, which looks like the Vesica Pisces and means gate, we end up with our English word through. And that is what a wormhole does. It takes us through the galaxy. Now, how does that work? What's going on here? Are we tripping onto a primordial symbol system of the gates of the gods? That's my take. In fact, if you go to the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, the authority on the Sumerian language, you find out that the Nibiru, it's always the Nibiru, not Nibiru, is defined not as a planet. It's defined instead as a ferry boat, a star, and a gate. And it is a crossing point. Nibiru, the Nibiru, is a stargate, which is why it's called Planet X. On the left is a diagram from Brian Greene's best-selling book based on the PBS series, The Fabric of Our Cosmos. It shows the fabric of space-time tearing and a wormhole growing. This was sent to me by Laird Scranton, author of an incredible book called The Hidden Meanings of the Dogon Tribe. So on the left is Brian Greene's diagram presented by a modern physicist of space-time tearing and a wormhole growing. On the right is the Egyptian hieroglyph to tear. Any questions about where modern physicists are getting this knowledge? Are they reincarnated Egyptian priests? I can't make that claim. What I can suggest to you is that the Stargate science of the gods is coming back around, and it's going to be mainstream science within the next decade. On the left is, once again, a modern portrayal of a wormhole. On the right is another Egyptian hieroglyph called Iti, which means take possession, and it has some human legs attached now to the wormhole. I went into my English dictionary and I looked up the Egyptian word Iti and found that, in fact, we still use that word today in an appropriate context. Iti is found in itinerancy, itinerating, which means traveling from place to place. It's in our English word itinerary, which means a plan for a journey. It's also in our word itinerate, which means to travel from place to place, preaching or lecturing or wandering. And now I find that that's what I do. I itinerate, I travel from place to place talking about the ancient science of wormholes. And I can now thank the Egyptian priest for giving me a definition for what we're doing today. Following the Egyptian theme, this is the Egyptian hieroglyph for the word fenth, which means word or serpent. With what I've given you this morning, you can readily interpret this word. We have a serpent, we have a waveform, and we have a wormhole symbol. Worm and serpent. The same wormhole symbol appears in the Egyptian word nether. The Egyptian gods were called neter, which loosely translated means divine being. The neter lived in Neter land, which is like Peter Pan's Never Never land. And to make the Templar move, the knight's move, Never Never land is second to the right, straight on till morning. And that's what we also see represented here in the glyph of the neter, the divine beings. They have their flag or their pole, which is their ultimate power tool, their utensil. We have the wormhole, and we have a vibrating string. This is the glyph of the gods. If we can see the meaning of this, we're on the path to decoding the secrets of the gods. But we can readily apply this symbolism in a very interesting way. Let's turn to Moses' encounter with God at Mount Sinai. And it says, "And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the Mount Sinai." Well, now let's interpret this in William Henry's Authorized Stargate Bible. "And Moses brought forth the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the nether part of the mount," i.e. the mouth of the wormhole. And I derive that because the Egyptian hieroglyph for nether, the nether part of the mount, contains all of our wormhole symbolism. "Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke," says the book of Exodus, "because the Lord descended upon it in fire. And the smoke thereof ascended as the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mound quaked greatly." This is a Rosicrucian drawing that you're seeing here from the 16th century of Jesus entering the earth plane. We can take out the word mound and insert the word pyramid, and we have the actual location of Mount Sinai, the quaking mound. Why did the Rosicrucians portray Jesus atop a radiant pyramid? Because he comes and goes through a stargate. That's why. As portrayed in the movie Stargate. Is he atop a radiant pyramid in this Rosicrucian drawing, or is he in fact in the mouth of the wormhole? We can see the clear shape of the X now when compared with the hourglass shape of the wormhole. The symbolism is complete and it's crystal clear. Another Egyptian word that's important to our conversation this morning is the word mesuth, which means birth. Curiously, the Egyptian word birth has our wormhole symbolism within it once again. This is curious. This is Enki toasting the creation of humanity from 2300 BC. Enki toasts humanity with the Grail cup, and the human enters the earth through a vessel or a container. Now, see anything remotely interesting about this other than the fact that it looks like a nuclear cooling tower? Do you see any hidden shapes in this diagram, in this cylinder seal, that would cause you a bit of wonderment? How about the wormhole shape, the Egyptian wormhole glyph, that is emerging from the figure's body? Here once again is the faraway look at it, where we clearly see the wormhole shape now, and here is our detail. The Sumerians and Egyptians are swapping wormhole symbolism? Interesting. It relates to the birth of humanity? Even more interesting. Is that how we got here? Is that the goddess's umbilical cord as a wormhole? I was in Egypt, Luxor, on a cruise ship back in May of 2003 and had my mind blown wide open by a whirling dervish dance. The figure starts out spinning. Next thing I know, he takes his skirt and he's got a wormhole wrapped around, he's got a UFO wrapped around his body. And he's spinning it. He is Elijah in the whirlwind. This is Ezekiel's chariot through which he ascended into the heavens. He is a human UFO. But he didn't stop there. He continued by pulling out a second skirt. And he began spinning the second skirt and transformed himself into a wormhole. The mystic Islamic whirling dervish dance is the wormhole dance, as I term it. Here is a modern portrayal of a wormhole. Here's our whirling dervish. When I talked with this dancer afterward, he told me that he was reenacting a story that told of the unity of heaven and earth. Here's a Schwarzschild wormhole. We have the familiar hourglass shape. We have the Vesica Pisces in the center with the red Taurus, the ring of the gods. We have the Egyptian hieroglyph Rus, which means door or gate. And we have the derivation of the word dervish coming from deruvish. Literally translated, dervish means one who is at the door to enlightenment. And we are all this morning knocking on the door to enlightenment and further illuminating symbolism such as this of Jesus entering earth through the mouth or gate of a wormhole. Near the completion of his dance, the whirling dervish collapsed his wormhole, and then his assistant brought out a sheet, which is what we see in the background, and the dancer wrapped the second skirt into a bundle. Then he covered it with the linen sheet and offered milk to it. And the message is complete. The message is complete and crystal clear. This is how the divine beings travel the cosmos, through wormholes. And you and I are those divine beings. So back to our Egyptian glyph, the word nether, once again, meaning net through. We notice in the second line there that nether also means cloth, woven stuff. That cloth is the woven garment of the gods, the matrix of the universe, called the seamless garment of the goddess, the universe itself. Our super tool of the gods, the wormhole and the vibrating string once again. I'm reviewing these because now we're prepared to see them in the glyph of the Egyptian god Ptah, the architect of heaven and earth, the master craftsman, the master alchemist, the sculptor, designer, and the fashioner of the bodies of men. He was the blacksmith, sculptor, and mason of the gods. And what we note in his hieroglyph is that he not only has the double helix of DNA, but he also has the super tool of the gods, the power utensil of the gods. Here is Ptah in other forms with his blue skull cap on. He's got his rod. He's sculpting humanity in the shape of an egg or a whole note on the right-hand side. Ptah is considered to be interchangeable with Enki. Well, no wonder they share this wormhole symbolism. They're the creator gods. They're the smith gods. The Greeks called Ptah and Enki Hephaistos. And they showed him traveling the earth, or traveling the skies aboard his winged craft, carrying his axe, his power tool that is symbolic of the ultimate knowledge of the gods, how to become a ring lord. I can wax poetic here for a moment about the 1959 Les Paul Standard. I pulled this off eBay the other day. This guitar sells for $170,000. It's called the Stargate of the Gods, the Stairway to Heaven, the Burning Bush, because all the gods today play the Les Paul, the Paul or pole of the gods. Music, vibration, tones, rock and roll is all enfolded in this story. Back to nether. we see that now they've added another glyph. And the glyph that they've added is at the very end. We have the super tool, we have the wormhole symbol, we have the vibrating string. Now we have the hieroglyph of Jesus? No, that's the hieroglyph of Jesus. This is the Egyptian hieroglyph of the heron, the bird or being of light who came from the center of the galaxy, riding upon his arc of the millions of years, curiously once again shaped like a wormhole. When the heron landed on Earth, it became the guardian of the dual-headed serpent ship of the gods and the McDonald's arches. The waveform, the golden tone. The detail of the dual-headed serpent ship of the gods sitting upon a pillar of water with a hole in it, with the stairway to heaven mounted upon the ship. A more elaborate version of the same theme, where we see the blue lotus at the end of the ship of the gods. We see two winged goddesses who are protecting the God being in the blue orb, the blue tone, the blue apple. We see in this detail the blue lotus at the bottom of the piece of jewelry. We see that the early Christians cut and pasted this exact same imagery. The 2nd century Coptic or Egyptian Christians showed Jesus as the God in the blue apple, the blue orb, held aloft by the goddesses. But what Christianity omitted was what? The ship. Where's the Ark of the Gods? They removed it. This is when the Stargate and wormhole imagery was taken away from us. But I submit to you that today the great religions have never had a more serious rival. That rival is Stargate metaphysics, because this will produce the occult associations which will bring about the revolution Sir Francis Bacon termed the new Atlantis. In fact, this is a NASA diagram off their website of a warp craft, their term obviously borrowed from Star Trek, going through a Stargate or a wormhole. And I think NASA ought to change their name to the New Atlantis Stargate Association and get ourselves aimed at really fully bringing these secrets forward. Another NASA image. This time what we see is curiously a hand holding a glowing green orb while the warp craft bends space-time as it goes through the wormhole. You Google the word wormhole, you're going to find images such as this. A serpent rope going through the matrix, the cloth, tearing space. Which brings us back to ancient Sumerian art, where Enki is portrayed as a bearded man with the body of a serpent that is a ship. In fact, he is carrying the sun god Shamash to earth. Now, some might be tempted to say that his reptilian form here indicates that he's a reptilian. But I'm not of that mindset. I think it reveals something far more profound than that. Another example of Enki as the ship of the gods. I think he's portrayed in this way because he is in fact the wormhole itself, or is portraying this is the manner through which the Anunnaki travel the cosmos. The Nibiru is a stargate. Enki is, of course, once again portrayed as the bearded man with the body of a serpent, offering the secret to Utnapishtim that will enable him here to survive the flood by building an ark. By building an ark, like Noah's ark. Flipping back now to Egyptian glyphs, we find that the word neter, with the power tool and the god being, is a serpent god who bestowed godhood on the dead. We are the dead, because while we're in human form, we are not fully living. We are a cocoon trying to become the butterfly. And it is the neter gods that provide us the means to achieve that godhood. And so we find that all the gods of the underworld, the gods of the stargates, are portrayed as bearded men with the body of a serpent. This is Thoth. This, of course, is Jesus, from a portrayal that predates the Shroud of Turin. We see that Enki, Jesus, Thoth, all the gods of the underworld are in fact of the same priesthood, all likely Anunnaki. And I think that the secrets that Enki offers to us ultimately, the secrets for building the ark, are the secrets for building the ark of the millions of years, the ship or Stargate of the gods. And so on the left, once again, we see NASA's portrayal of a wormhole opening and a sperm going into the egg, of a warp craft going into a Stargate or a wormhole. And on the right, we see a simple line drawing of the concentric rings. Now, I took something very interesting from this connection between these drawings. It suggests to me that when we see a piece of art and we see the two-dimensional concentric rings, that it actually represents a three-dimensional experience going through a vortex or a wormhole. So let's apply this thesis. Have you ever seen this before? What we see are concentric rings with a cross in the center. This is the logo for Atlantis. No wonder we can't find Atlantis. It's submerged. It's sub rosa. It's the underworld. It is a Stargate. And that's what I'm going to ask you to consider in the next few moments. This is a drawing by Dr. Paul Schliemann of the great city of the Golden Gates, and we can see the familiar logo now of Atlantis, the concentric rings with the cross within it. Again, is Atlantis actually a wormhole or a vortex? Is this the lost science of Atlantis, and the new Atlantis represents the recovery of this secret? This is a drawing from Manly P. Hall's book on mandalas from the late 1800s. And what it shows is the summit of Meru. Plato tells us that the Atlanteans were called the people of Meru, referring to the center portion of Atlantis. And so what Manly P. Hall is showing us here is a drawing, a Buddhist drawing of the summit or apex of Meru, the center of Atlantis. And what do we see? Well, we see the same concentric rings, and instead of a cross in the center, we see 4 circles, 1, 2, 3, 4, that form the cross. So this is in fact a top-down view of Atlantis, is what he is presenting to us. Meru was called the World Mountain. And I think there's a wordplay or pun there, because world can also refer to something that is whirling, a vortex. Meru, the World Mountain. This is a drawing from Japan from 1678 of the World Mountain Meru, the central axis again, of humanity. And as we look in, we see what? It's our familiar wormhole shape once again. How does this happen? Was Atlantis a wormhole, or are they describing to us an archaic primordial sacred science that we today are reinterpreting as a wormhole or a Stargate? In Plato's description of the Holy Temple of Atlantis, it states that the entrance to the temple was marked by 2 pillars, one made of a substance imperishable by fire and the other of a substance imperishable by water. It is widely assumed that these 2 pillars are similar to the gateway to Solomon's temple. You have 1 pillar here and 1 pillar here. But I'm not quite sure that that's the way we're supposed to look at this, because an upward pointing triangle is a pillar. That is a pyramid, and the pyramid is called the pillar of the gods. So let us suppose instead of side by side, 1 pillar reaches up into the heavens, and the second pillar is the downward pointing triangle that forms the hourglass shape of the wormhole. Now let's go one step further and say that these 2 pillars were in fact made of fire and water and not just imperishable by it. When fire, which is simply frequency or vibration, is added to water, crystal results. And now compare the apex of Meru with a quartz crystal point. And we see the crystal connection. And we all know the connection that Atlantis has with pure quartz crystal. Lo and behold, though, we're told that the whirling mountain Meru collapsed. And that's what we're seeing in this diagram right here, is the collapse of Meru. Here's our sheet that the whirling dancer was given again. I have no idea what that is. What is that? Some kind of a craft? I don't know, but here's the detail. We can see the collapse of Meru, and as it collapses, the Japanese drawer here, or the artist, has shown us that it looks sort of like crystals going off, or has an other dimensional suggestion to this artwork. And here you see the detail, and right next to the World Mountain, we see what? A hare, the symbol for Osiris, the bunny rabbit, symbol of Jesus, of Easter, of resurrection. Modern science says, yeah, wormholes collapse. This is what it looks like. Compare it with the collapse of the World Mountain Meru, the center of Atlantis. Any questions? I mean, how, once again, is this possible? Was, in fact, Atlantis a Stargate? Or did they possess this technology and we lost it? But now, in the new Atlantis, we are reclaiming the secrets of this broken Stargate and are now in a position to repair it. The Gate of Eden is the gate of Atlantis that was closed. But then along came a story called the Tower of Babel, when humankind gathered together under a king named Nimrod, Merodach, his full name being Merodach, Nimrod, a devotee of Enki and Marduk. He assembles humanity to build a tower that reaches into the heavens. Originally, the word Babel meant gate. But Yahweh decided he wasn't ready for company then. We weren't ready to rebuild the gate of Atlantis, so he destroyed our tower and separated us by language. Nimrod, by the way, is the founder of Freemasonry. And within the Masonic tradition, we are told that Lady Liberty enlightening the world is in fact symbolic of the Tower of Babel. And we see the double helix symbol going straight up the center in the staircase, the stairway to heaven. The American Masons who built the pedestal for Lady Liberty built it in the shape of a Babylonian-style ziggurat in honor of Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. So we have this very interesting connection building in America between America and ancient Iraq in the mysteries of the gate of the gods. After Yahweh destroyed the tower, the Hebrew scribes changed the meaning of the word Babel from gate to confusion and nonsense. And all who talk about the gate became babblers. And I've been accused of being a babbler. And I take that as an honorable title. Because when you know the secrets of the gate, you sound like a babbler to those who are still asleep. Of course, Nimrod reincarnated. Nimrod reincarnated as the biblical king Nebuchadnezzar, whose story is told in the book of Daniel. We'll get to that fellow on the left there momentarily. Because Saddam says that he was, in fact, the reincarnated Nebuchadnezzar. Whoa, just happened there. We have a continuous transmission of thought here from ancient Babylon to modern cultural affairs. An Iraqi saying runs, Nebuchadnezzar was given the keys to Saddam Hussein. I started talking with Art Bell about this story in 1998. Hey, Art, Saddam believes he's Nebuchadnezzar. He's going to open a Stargate, and we're going to go to war in Iraq. Yeah, whatever. Then in 2001, I predicted that if George Bush was elected president, we would be at war in Iraq within 6 months to get the Stargate of Iraq. And it happened. It happened because these guys are following a script. They're following a script laid down long ago, long ago. The script is very prominent in the book of Daniel when Nebuchadnezzar goes into Babylon and loots and levels the Temple of Solomon and brings the wise men of the temple back to Babylon. Included are 3 wise men from the temple. Included are Daniel and Ezekiel. Well, Nebuchadnezzar knows that the 3 wise men from the Temple of Solomon can help him get this gadget to work that is called the golden image of the beast. And that's what we see portrayed here with this figure standing atop it as the golden image of the beast, stood between 90 and 180 feet tall. Nebuchadnezzar bets these 3 wise men that they can get this gadget to work and enter the fiery furnace that is opened by it. He'll convert to their religion. So the 3 wise men put on their coat, their hat, and their other garments so that they're attired like the ancient goddess Mari, who put on a helmet called her Shigura helmet, which Sitchin says literally translated means that which makes go far into the universe. And they put on their pala garment, which the Bible dictionaries tell us comes from the word nephal or Nephilim, which means to be extraordinary or to be powerful. And these 3 wise men enter this fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar and his men assemble and are astonished when the men come back out. Not only are the men in pristine condition, they're not alone. Depending upon which version of the story you read, they either brought back one like the Son of God, or they actually brought back the Son of God, as in Christ. What has just transpired in this episode? Well, the Bible leaves us wanting more. It doesn't tell us what happened. The Iraqi tradition, however, tells us exactly what happened. The guy brought his wife with him. They built ziggurats for him and loaded up those ziggurats with temple libraries. These libraries, I believe, must have to do with the gates of the gods, because that's all Nebuchadnezzar and Nimrod were interested in. Saddam Hussein possessed that knowledge. That's why we went to Iraq. After Nebuchadnezzar opened the gate, a watcher and a holy one came down from the heavens and drove him from men and made him eat grass as an oxen. And this is William Blake's portrayal of Nebuchadnezzar in a crazed fashion. Why did we do what we did to Saddam Hussein? Well, according to the CIA stooge Chalabi, the reason that we did this was for the Iraqi people, to take away from him his status as the reincarnated Nebuchadnezzar. This wasn't for Americans. This was for the Iraqi people, to complete the script, to do to Saddam what Nebuchadnezzar had done. But actually in the story, Nebuchadnezzar had a much better fate. He was driven from men and did eat grass all right, but William Blake and others, including the present administration, have misinterpreted this symbolism, because we're told that in fact Nebuchadnezzar's body was wet with the dew of heaven, the crystalline superconductive substance that Lawrence Gardner says fed the light bodies of the pharaohs. His body was covered with this superconductive substance till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers and his nails like bird claws. Nebuchadnezzar became an Anunnaki. If we're following the script correctly in our modern world, we will see, and I'm predicting it here, the resurrection of Saddam Hussein. People might not like that notion, but what I would suggest is we may see a rehabilitation of his image. They might let him off the hook, just like Nebuchadnezzar was let off the hook. The Tower of Babel was modeled upon the Pillar of Meru. That's what Masonic lore says. And they seem to think they know, because Nimrod founded their secret society. What we're looking at here is a 2nd century Chinese drawing of Meru, the central pillar of Atlantis. It resembles an antenna because that's what Mongolian and Chinese myth says it was. The immortals dwelled at Meru because of the energy attracted by this antenna. And when we look more closely, we see, it appears to have a pulse emanating from it. And at the top of the pulse, we find a pyramid, the apex, the summit of Meru, the bottom half of our wormhole shape. And here it is in detail. looks very strikingly similar to the World Mountain at the center of Atlantis, and it also resembles a crystalline point. But it also resembles something else. I was in Florida a few years ago giving a talk on this subject, and a scientist came up to me afterward and he said, I was basically asleep through your presentation until you put up that blueprint. And I said, what blueprint? And he went through my slides until he came to my Meru diagram back here. And he said, that blueprint right there. He said, I designed particle beam weapons for a living. You know, lightsabers, laser cannons, Star Wars type weapons. He said, do you realize that that right there is a blueprint for a particle beam weapon? He said, yeah, look, you see that rotating platform? That's the platform, the whirling platform that the weapon sits on. These are pinchers right here, he said, that modulate the pulse emanating from the weapon. Well, on the left is our 2nd century drawing. On the right is a diagram of a cyclotron, an early 20th century particle accelerator designed by Ernest O. Livermore. And I take the scientist's challenge. Yes, indeed. The base of the Meru pillar, the pillar of Atlantis, does indeed resemble a particle accelerator, a device that's used in the splitting of the atom in the development of weapons systems. Well, but also now Stargate designers tell us that we could build giant space-based particle accelerators that open stargates and wormholes. Wow. Is this on the right from the 2nd century Chinese manuscript, in fact, a carryover from Atlantis found in the Cave of the Thousand? Was this the primordial sacred technology of the gods? Looks like a sword because it's a weapon system. But following the biblical adage, swords can be beat into plowshares. Could this be the ultimate tool of the gods, the utensil we have been looking at, that's symbolized by a flag or a pole that opens the stairway to heaven? Well, if you show it to a chiropractor, they'd say what you're actually looking at is your spinal cord. But remember, in the birth symbol, we saw the wormhole, and in the Sumerian cylinder seal celebrating the creation of humanity, we also saw the wormhole symbol. There must be a relationship between our body as a stairway to heaven and the actual stargates and wormholes that permeate our universe. In fact, on the left is our Meru drawing, on the right is a uterus, the gate through which each of us traveled to this dimension. On the left is our harmonic of God. On the right is the very image of God. I hired an artist named Jack Andrews from Tucson, Arizona to bring this to life for me. Jack wasn't familiar with my work, so he made a perfect candidate for an artist to work with. And I asked him to take the Meru drawing and render it for us in 3D so that we could get a look at what we're actually looking at here from a modern perspective. As we look at it, we can see that, hey, we're looking at something potentially very interesting here. Because what I'm suggesting is that this pillar is, in fact, the center of Atlantis. This is the Meru pillar at the center of Atlantis that became the center point of the Atlantean civilization, and Francis Bacon says will be the center of the new Atlantis. In this detail here, we can see that the particle accelerator does appear to open a vortex or a gate of some kind. You can see the same thing happening here with the rings emanating from the particle accelerator as it opens the gate. At the top, Jack sent me the apex of the Meru pillar rendered in 3D, and I said, wow, that is astonishing. That looks like some kind of a craft. And I said, furthermore, it looks very similar to the Kiro symbol of Jesus, the Catholic symbol for Jesus Christ. It has the flag of the netter gods, the pole, the utensil of the gods. And we can see that we have the X shape right up here corresponding with the X of the Kiro. And I was just blown away by the similarity between these two. Made more clear here, where we clearly have the same X shape going on with the craft of the gods ascending into the heavens. And here's the comparison of the super tool of the gods, the flag or pole of the gods, with the key rose symbol the Catholics use to signify Jesus Christ, which ultimately should represent the primordial sacred secrets of the gods. And to make it clear, the flag or axe of the gods, I believe, is a particle accelerator, a device that can slice and dice matter, that can create weapon systems, can also be used to open stargates and wormholes. Following the Jesus theme, we see this Russian icon where Jesus is held aloft in a green orb held by two angels, and we see him in our familiar concentric rings. This is the transfiguration and ascension scenes of Jesus. And now we see it compared with the way NASA portrays a warp craft bending space-time. And once again, returning to our 16th century Rosicrucian drawing of Jesus entering Earth through the smoking Sinai, the Stargate. We now know that Sinai is in fact the sine wave, the mountain of the gods. 2nd century Coptic Christian portrayal of Jesus shows him holding a book in his hand. The book is unidentified. But as we look more closely, we see that on the spine of the book, it has our wormhole symbol. And on the center, we see the concentric rings on the cover of the book. Stargates for Dummies, An Idiot's Guide to Wormholes. Okay, just the Book of Love. The Book of Love. Zecharia Sitchin began publishing books in the 1970s, shortly after the Apollo missions. And he claims this is a fiery rocket ship of the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki, he said, came to Earth in fiery rocket ships. And this is a portrayal, in his opinion, of a fiery rocket ship of the Anunnaki. That ship is also called a Shem. As a matter of fact, the word Shem means the shining, fiery stone, specifically the capstone to a pillar. It is the root for our word shaman, a mystery man, as well as Shambhala. Now, Shambhala is another name for Atlantis because at the center of Shambhala is Meru. Well, here is the top of the Meru drawing from the 2nd century that it's rendered by Jack Andrews. And here is a comparison with the Shem craft that the Anunnaki came to Earth in. They're virtually identical. Well, I have to mention, too, I was back in Memphis one time, and I was lecturing, in fact, that time to a Mensa group, a genius society, and some genius in the group said, that's not a fiery rocket ship, that's a snow cone. Okay? So somewhere in between snow cone and fiery rocket ship, we might be able to ascertain exactly what this drawing is, but I'm making the comparison here between the Shem craft and the apex of the Meru pillar. And here is another take on it by Jack Andrews. Here it is in isolation. The reason I'm going through this with you is because what I'm going to suggest to you is that the Anunnaki did not come to Earth in fiery rocket ships. They came to Earth in warp craft. They came to Earth in warp craft through stargates and wormholes. And in fact, what we're looking at here at the top of the Meru drawing is the ring of the gods, the ship of the gods, the stargate of the gods. Mari's pillar, the ultimate power tool of the gods, is a particle accelerator that opens holes in space. That's what's portrayed in this depiction here. And when we point to the pine cone-shaped object at the top, that's in fact the warp craft of the Anunnaki, the ship through which they enter the stargates and wormholes. So if I have a few moments left, I'd like to continue. And I'd like to continue by applying this yet further to some of the Christian imagery, and not to pick on Christian imagery here, but it just is so ripe with expression in terms of what I'm detailing here. This is a portrayal of Jesus with the ultimate power tool in his hands, the cross, which I would submit to you is in fact a particle accelerator. He is opening the mouth of the Leviathan, which is another word for our Milky Way galaxy, the Leviathan. The church has seen fit to demonize Jesus' slaying of the Leviathan. They tell us that at the time of the second coming, he will slay the Leviathan, as if it's some form of evil. But there's another way we can look at this. I went and looked at the word Leviathan in the English dictionary. And when you do that, you break it down into its component parts, you find that Levi is the root for love. It means everlasting life. And in fact, the Levites were the gurus that Moses hung out with. So that's Levi, everlasting life and love. The suffix of Leviathan, atan, has our th sound in it, the th sound of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. But it could well be that that is a word play or a pun for a tone. A thon could be a tone. Looked at from that perspective, Jesus is lifting the mouth or lifting the tone of everlasting life, the Leviathan. He is in fact lifting the tone of everlasting life that is the Stargate or wormhole with the particle accelerator. Now, once again, people are going to say it's ridiculous to say that some ancient person 2,000 years ago walking around in sandals possessed a particle accelerator. Fine. But still, we can today take those myths and stories and the archetypal energies of them and apply them to the development of the stargates and wormholes of our future. Jesus and the other Christianity and the other religions are either going to survive this transition into Stargate metaphysics, or they're just going to die off. And for most, I would suggest that we don't want them to die off. We want them to transform. Up on top is the Maya symbol for the Milky Way. They use the English letter G to symbolize our Milky Way. G also symbolizes egg and love. And we can see why they use the G to symbolize the Milky Way, because galaxies do look like the English letter G from the face on. Where did the Mayans get that knowledge? Did somebody tell that to them? Did they remote view the galaxy and come up with this? This is a Mayan hieroglyph, and what it shows, we can all readily interpret this symbol now. It shows the stairway to heaven going into the G, the Milky Way. This is the stairway into the galaxy. On the left, we see a Mayan symbol. On the right, we see a Cathar symbol from southern France. The Cathars claimed that they were taught a secret symbol system by the followers of Jesus that represented the true gospel of love. And it was a grouping of symbols. And what we see in the Cathar symbol is what? We see a letter G with the cross, also called the Scala Dei, or stairway to heaven, emerging from it. This is a perfect match with the Maya Milky Way symbolism. And what I've done in my Stargate 2012 DVD and other work is attempt to create or look at the symbolism from the basis of a Milky Way-based metaphysics, because what I believe is that the ancients had profound knowledge of our Milky Way, and in particular, they had knowledge of how to open the stairway to heaven, the Stargate of the gods. And so what I'm saying to you is that the Christian cross is actually a knockoff symbol of the original utensil of the gods, the power tool of the gods that was used to open stargates and wormholes. And when Jesus is portrayed lifting the mouth of the Leviathan, the tone of everlasting life, he's doing exactly what Istara or Mary had done 2,000 years before him. He is reenacting an archetypal Anunnaki drama of the opening of a stargate or a wormhole, and vis-a-vis the opening of the tone or attraction of the tone of everlasting life. Medieval artwork reflects this, where we see Jesus in the mouth of the Leviathan traveling through the galaxy and coming out the other end. Here's a detail of that, and we can see the knotwork or notework of the serpent rope that permeates our galaxy, the umbilical cord linking heaven and earth. This one's particularly informative because we see the knotwork or notework, the labyrinth of the serpent rope, of the wormhole, the umbilical cord, as it wraps around. Jesus emerges at the top in a shape that is exactly, virtually identical anyway, to the shape of our Milky Way galaxy. This is what I call Milky Way-based metaphysics, of taking our old archetypal myths in Scripture and applying our understanding from a modern scientific perspective of our Milky Way galaxy. The movie Contact, of course, is one of our favorites. In the story, Jodie Foster receives a blueprint for a device, a hyperdimensional device that will open a gateway in heaven. And she travels through that gateway. I had an opportunity to interview Richard C. Hoagland on Dreamland one time, and I said, Richard, you know, you're watching that movie Contact, which was written by Carl Sagan, a person who did not believe in extraterrestrial craft, did not believe in UFOs. In fact, was a harsh critic of those who believed in it. But yet, as one of his last life's achievement, he's going to write a book about first contact with an extraterrestrial civilization. So he has a little bit of a conundrum here. If he's not going for the idea that they travel in spaceships, then how are they going to get here? Well, he goes to his friend Kip Thorne at Caltech, and they come up with the idea of the traversable wormhole. The traversable wormhole, and modern wormhole science is born. But here's the catch. In the movie Contact, the name of the character who actually built this device was called S.R. Haddon. S.R. Haddon of Haddon Industries. That name was really kind of a funny choice of names to me, and I asked Richard Hoagland about this. I said, Richard, do you think Carl Sagan was telling us something when he wrote that? Because here's my question. In the ancient world, in between Nimrod and Nebuchadnezzar was a figure, a biblical king of Babylon called S.R. Haddon. I said, Richard, do you think that Sagan was trying to say, by using that name S.R. Haddon, that the secrets that he was talking about in Contact had their roots in ancient Babylon with the Tower of Babel? And he said, absolutely. It's exactly what Carl Sagan was doing, pointing that this technology existed in the ancient world and it belonged to the Anunnaki. This is Abydos, the gate to the underworld in ancient Egypt, the domain of the god of the underworld. And I want to show you another power tool of the gods that we discover the secrets of at Abydos. What happens is you take this pillar right here with the wormhole floating in it, the serpent rope floating within it, called the Egyptian Shuti pillar, which means enlightenment. You take that and you put it on top of this glyph, which resembles in form and I believe function the biblical Ark of the Covenant. Here's a comparison right here of the biblical Ark of the Covenant, Moses' power tool. And you form the complete device that the ancient Egyptians called Osiris. Osiris, the god of resurrection. Here's some takes on what Osiris, the device, looked like. And here's a representation of it done for me by Mr. Dana Augustine, an artist. And what we can see is that we've taken the Shuti pillar, the Enlightenment pillar, and put it on top of the Ark, and we form this complete device called Osiris. Clearly has the base of the Ark, but it has the Shuti pillar attached to it, something that the Hebrew Patriarchy removed. They took it out because that pillar belonged to the gals. Now, the idea here is that this device, according to Egyptian myth and lore, held the soul of the savior Osiris and also could drill holes in space. So we appear to be looking at some form of a Stargate device, in my opinion. And what I'm suggesting to you is that Osiris' Shuti pillar, his pillar of enlightenment, is exactly the same as Mary or Mari's pillar of enlightenment. It is exactly the same as the golden image of the beast that Nebuchadnezzar had such a hard time with. It is the device of the goddess. And this is what it is. The reason we can't find the biblical Ark of the Covenant is because we're not looking in the right place for it. The Ark of the Covenant is your solar plexus, the first 3 chakras of your body. The shooty pillar that's attached, that's your spinal cord system. The 2 tablets that sit up on top of the shooty pillar, those are the 2 hemispheres of your brain. The resurrection machine, the Stargate device we're looking for, you're sitting on it. It's you. It is you. And we count the chakras once again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All good children go to heaven. We want to know how to leave this planet? Well, first we have to become craftsmen. We have to learn the art of ancient alchemy, the primordial sacred science of the gods, the Stargate mysteries of the gods. A line drawing of the Pillar of Osiris, the resurrection machine, the Stargate device from the Temple of Dendera in Egypt. The goddesses tend the pillar right here because that's their job, not the guys. And what do we see on this? We see the ark, and now we see the ship of the gods attached to it. And we compare the ship of the gods with the modern portrayal of a wormhole, and the story is complete. This is a device that opens holes in space. Therefore, they accompany it with the ship of the gods, which is a wormhole. Now, I was talking with George Nuri one night on Coast to Coast, and a woman called in as we were discussing this diagram, and she said, well, I'm an Egyptologist, and they don't teach us this in college. Okay? Furthermore, she says, I have a master's degree in Egyptology, and she says, those things at the tips there you're calling the opening of the stargates, those aren't gates, those are lotuses. I said, yes, ma'am, you're right, those are lotuses. What does the Egyptian word lotus mean? She said, gate. Okay? Why am I all alone with this? Okay? What aren't we seeing here? What aren't we teaching Egyptologists these days? But that's what we see here, and the comparison is complete. The comparison is crystal clear. And once again, this is the type of imagery and the understanding of this sacred primordial science that's going to help us to transform ourselves, to become beings of light, the pure ones that we've been so long promised that we can become. In fact, what we're looking at here is the stairway to heaven mounted to the ship, and that's what this is right here. And you have this inside of you. But our culture, our civilization says, hey, we want to keep everybody at the lower 3 chakras. We want people focused on 3 questions. What am I going to eat? Where am I going to sleep? Who am I going to sleep with? And maybe a 4th question. What's on TV tonight? But once we apprehend these mysteries and we kickstart our enlightenment pillar within us, our life's focus shifts, it changes. Our questions change. Where did I come from? How did I get here? And most importantly, the big one that they don't want us to focus on, how do I leave? How do I get out of here? How do I ascend just like Jesus did? It's not just a matter of faith. There is a sacred primordial science behind that. It's the Stargate science of the gods. In my Stargate 2012 DVD, I talk about a substance that the Mayans said is going to come out of the sky in 2012, and they called it its, or eats. Well, this is what the Israelites experienced when the dew, or the manna from heaven, came out of the sky, and they looked at it and they said, what is it? Yeah, that's it. It's called its. And then the Israelites ate it. It's eats. And so the Mayans and the Israelites are partaking of this same blessed, magical substance that comes out of the Milky Way. And this, to me, is a Cathar glyph of the Milky Way spitting this primordial substance. And here we see a 2nd century Coptic Christian portrayal of Jesus with his rod in hand. In all early Christian art, or example after example, when Jesus is shown performing his miracles, turning water into wine and raising Lazarus from the dead, he does so with his wand or rod of miracles in hand, his particle accelerator. In fact, he's got his rod in this hand, and in the opposite hand, the other hand, he's got his ring, his chakra, his tone of power. My friends, today there are 2 forms of particle accelerators, rods and rings. And here is our master teacher with those technologies. There is a substance that is going to come out of the Milky Way in 2012 that has a potential to save us, to transform our civilization. But what we need is the technology to bring that substance out of the Milky Way. And what I'm suggesting to you is that this rod in Jesus' hand is in fact the remote control for the tree of life device, the particle accelerator itself. It's sort of like the mouse to the computer, if you will. And so I've made it my business to look for examples of rods and rod-like technology that refer to the functioning of our human body. And so what we see here on the right is a rod that culminates in 3 stars, just the way Jesus' rod culminates in 3 orbs, which happens to be the Buddhist esoteric symbol for the Word, for the life force energy upon which the world is built. And it suggests he is the symphonic conductor of the word or the tone of life. He is the conductor of the tone of life through his rod or tool of the gods. The alchemists use this same analogy when they portray the human body as a cone or a shem topped by 3 orbs that come together, just as we see in this diagram right here. In fact, what we're looking at here in this diagram is from Nashville, Tennessee, where I live. It is a 2,200-foot long rod that's laid out on 19 acres that is strikingly similar to the Meru pillar of Atlantis. Now, the amazing thing about this is that not only is there a striking similarity between these 2 diagrams, both are representative of the rod of God, but we're told that during the end times, Elijah will once again reappear with the rod of God and lay it out in the new Jerusalem, the new city of peace. Nashville, Tennessee, my friends, is the only city in the world that has one of these rods laid out. And furthermore, as you walk this place, what we discover is that each of the 7 chakras are perfectly marked with appropriate symbolism. It's laid out on 2,200 feet long, laid out on 19 acres at the base of the Tennessee State Capitol. I've walked this place with thousands of people, and they all note the archetypal symbolism here that is absolutely overwhelming. There are 7 springs that run underneath this complex. And what I'm submitting to you, the reason I'm showing this to you is because this is a perfect representation of this rod that I have been describing. And it is yet another example of the way in which this symbolism is reappearing in our world. Remember, I talked about how at the entranceway to Egyptian temples you have the twin peaks, the mountain of the gods, with the sun rising in the center? It's exactly what we have here in Nashville. We have twin buildings right here in the exact shape of the waveform, with the sun rising in the center in what is called the Court of 3 Stars. It is in fact the sister complex to the National Mall in Washington, D.C., which was laid out by Masons for an energetic effect, and we can bet that the exact same thing is going on in Nashville. This is the apex, the Court of 3 Stars, which corresponds with the very center of our brain, and we can see it has a very Stonehenge-like quality. 50 25-foot tall solid limestone pillars ring the court of 3 stars. Driven into the very center of the complex is an iron rod. And when you stand on that rod, your voice reverberates in your head. You stand 2 feet out and your voice sounds normal. What we're beginning to deduce from this place and starting to apprehend is that as you shuffle along this place and walk through the chakras, you are charging your body centers so that by the time you get up here to the very top at the court of 3 stars, which are actually pentacles, you are ready to stand on this iron rod, another manifestation from the book of Revelation, because the Messiah, we are told, will rule with a rod of iron. And when you stand on that rod, you are prepared to receive the charge, the spark of energy that will decalcify your pineal gland and open you to the vibration or tone of life coming from probably within our own Milky Way galaxy. And what that tone of life does is it releases secretions within your body. And within those secretions are the secrets of transforming an ordinary human into a divine being of light, preparatory to walking the Stargate of the Anunnaki. I believe that what we have in Nashville is in fact what the ancient Sumerians called the Anunnaki Duranki, which literally translated meant bond between heaven and earth. This complex, now here rendered by Jack Andrews in 3 dimensions, is the pillar of fire by day and the pillar of fire by night that leads the initiate to the promised land. The promised land is not a patch of real estate anywhere on this planet. It is, in fact, our Milky Way galaxy. And so what we have here is a very interesting manifestation of an ancient primordial technology. I believe, in fact, it is a representation of the gate of the gods. And in closing, I want to show you one final image from Jack Andrews of how he portrayed this. When we started working at the top, it almost looks like you can make out a Buddha hovering within the image. It's kind of not clearly defined, but I sort of see a Buddha, which is really wild because the Buddhists tell us that Buddha did live in the Meru pillar. This is his Bodhi tree, which we know is actually his body tree, but the tree of enlightenment is our body, and it is this particle accelerator. And isn't it amazing and synchronistic that Buddha should sort of manifest in this peculiar way? And Jack said, hey, that happens all the time with these computer 3D programs. They kind of have a mind of their own. You give them the parameters, and they take off, and they spit out some really amazing stuff. And this is pretty amazing to me. So I asked him to redo it, and to this time place the Buddha in plain sight so that we can see that that is ultimately what we're all trying to manifest by apprehending this imagery, is the means by which we can uplift the divine being within ourselves, to use these tools to lift the tone or vibration of heaven, to transform ourselves, to release the secretions from within our pineal gland that cause the awakening within, that allow us to see. And that, once again, is why I call my mystery school Enki's School for the Blind. So I want to thank you all for your attention today. You've been very kind to allow me to express this, and thank you very much. I have 4 minutes, Bob, if you'd like me to take the 4 minutes for questions. I just noticed that. Would that be good?
Where's that place that what city is that in?
Nashville, Tennessee.
That thing where you can stand around and
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Can you hear everybody?
Excuse me.
Yeah. Just tiny question. You showed us one of the drawings from China. You said from China, and the Buddhism painting. You said, right?
Yes.
But you said 2nd century. You said, but the Buddha was not born until 4th, 5th centuries. So I just want maybe tiny error.
No, the drawing, It was a 2nd century Chinese drawing.
Uh-huh.
Buddha was born in the 5th century
Yeah.
BC, so
Yeah.
it's right.
BC? Yeah, right.
What I
Okay.
said is that I think that 2nd century drawing was much older than we're actually told.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, just small, tiny.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Have you thought of, and could you comment on the similarity of the tunnel that near-death experiencers experience with the wormhole concept?
He's asking about the tunnel of the near-death experience. That is the whole nother dynamic or dimension of this research that, in fact, I'm moving into, is trying to incorporate that. I absolutely agree, and thank you for bringing that up, that's very closely exactly what we're describing. Yes. Yes, sir.
Could you relate your knowledge with masonry and the way that Washington, D.C. is laid out with the owl representing Moloch and the stone owl at the Bohemian Grove and all that? What's kind of like nonsense?
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're babbling, but you're not, because you're using the key words. And the owl, of course, is the symbol of the goddess Minerva, who is the muse of Thomas Jefferson. And all of D.C. was laid out for this energetic effect that ultimately is about this imagery of preparing us to, 1, create the new Atlantis, and 2, to be able to open the gateways into the other realms. Yes, ma'am.
2 aspects. Also, there's a lot of imagery is the black tower and the white tower on opposite sides, and I noticed on the Ark of the Covenant with the pole in the middle, there's also 2 poles on the side.
Right.
And that's been replayed and replayed, so I'd like a little more emphasis on that. In that, also the rods of Osiris that are used as healing tools.
Right.
They're held in the hands, and if you sit in the Buddha position with the rods, you make that Ark of the Covenant with both rods in your hand. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah.
And then also I'd like you to comment, I believe that the whole reason why we attacked Iraq was to get the Ark of the Covenant, to get the rod of the Mary, and that we might not find it there. I think that what we're after in these wars is the Stargate knowledge.
Right.
And that's why we sacked the museum.
Absolutely.
And got those tablets out.
Right.
And so I think that our government is actually still looking for physical devices for the Stargate. And that's why we're attacking these countries. I also think we went into the first country that we attacked, it starts with an A.
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan. Because that is the place in the world that is richest in crystalline rubies and sapphires and all of that sort of thing. So I think they're trying to use that, trying to get a hold of all of those crystals in those mountains so that they can use that as...
I totally agree, and what I hope I've provided you is the whole backstory to this. And again, going back to 1998 and trying to talk with Art Bell about this and bring this story forward, this really is what it's all about. And until we make the flip into this kind of consciousness, current events really aren't going to make a whole lot of sense. And so now what we're looking at is, hey, we have to now follow up, and which is what I'm doing now, in terms of what is it possible that we actually brought home from Iraq. And most assuredly, it's about literal physical technologies, but certainly the Stargate secrets of the Anunnaki, as I've shown you, if you know anything about this, you readily recognize that you're really looking for spiritual truths as much as you are literal physical technology. And so I would suggest that those in the know must be aware of that. I mean, I'm just a lonely guy out here with this much information compared to the volumes that our government is now in possession of. And what I've shown you is just the tip of the iceberg. This is what is in the open literature. We've been over there for over 100 years reclaiming this stuff. And just imagine what we must have in our secret vaults and stuff that isn't even available to researchers like you and I. One more question, because we're out of time.
I was just wondering, on the crystals and that, my eyesight's not good enough to see intricately enough. If they were tetrahedron conglomerate?
No, they were not, but I can show, if you come to my table, I'll be happy to show them to you.
All right,
Okay.
thanks.
So once again, everybody, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time and attention.